Hello and welcome to the program. I'm speaking today with Priyanthi Fernando, the Executive Director of the Center for Poverty Analysis. Welcome to the program, Priyanthi. It's been, I think, an ordeal to get you on the program. You don't do talk shows, I'm told.
Yes, I don't usually.
But thanks for joining us. The Center for Poverty Analysis, Gregory's Road, those in Colombo might have passed it. I certainly have had some professional association with it, but you look at, obviously, as the name would suggest, poverty analysis in Sri Lanka, the regionally. What exactly is the foci of work for the organization?
The Center for Poverty Analysis, or CEPA as we tend to call ourselves more popularly, is, yes, it looks at the poverty and the whole structural issues of poverty in Sri Lanka mainly, but we do have some collaborations with other research organizations and think tanks, universities who tend to work more widely. But I think in CEPA we believe that poverty is not just about working with poor people, or it's just not about researching the issues of poor people per se, but also about looking at the structural and institutional and political context in which poverty happens. So I think, for example, in Sri Lanka now, the issues are much more about not just absolute poverty, but also issues of relative poverty, about about justice issues, about who's gaining, who's losing from development.
Absolutely, and also I would imagine internal disparities between, say, the Western province and other provinces as we head towards 2015, the MDGs. And in fact, I think it was the country representative about a year or two ago of the World Bank who said there are actually two Sri Lankas. Not so much referring to the northeast problem, but the Sri Lanka of the Western province and the Sri Lanka beyond the Western province. And is that a lot of what you're seeing as well?
I think that's correct. I think there's probably more than two Sri Lankas. There's probably several Sri Lankas, you know, with different spatial differences, but also different differences in occupational categories that are more advantaged or more disadvantaged than others. There's a whole gender issue, so there's lots of things that still have to be done. I mean, we are very good at our headline indicators are, as you know, extremely good, but so we have high growth rates, we have MDGs, we are on track for a number of them
as a country.
But the underlying questions that we need to ask ourselves is, can we rest on those laurels, or should we be doing more? And I think there's a lot of things that still we need to do.
One of the big areas actually I want to talk to you about is the book that you have on your lap, Right of Way, which came out late last year by Shani Jayawardena. I've reviewed the book. I found it an excellent exposition of something that tens of thousands of us have actually been on, the Southern Expressway, but not really given too much of thought to as we are on that 1 hour drive at 100k from one end to the other. What's the reception of the book been like since the time it was launched? Have you got people reading and then saying that they are now more aware of actually the cost of the highway, as it were?
I think the book had a very good reception when it was launched, and it had quite a lot of media coverage as well, and people were reacting to it. I'm still not sure that we've done enough with it. For one thing, the book is still only in English, so I think
this is not. Is it for sale, or you're giving it?
It is for sale, but in CEPA we are not. We are not really. We don't make money. We are not interested in only selling our books. We are interested in getting the information out to where it's needed. So the book, I mean, it's I think it's something like 300 or 500 rupees. It's not a very expensive book, but it's also not available yet in Sinhala and Tamil, and we've been looking for support to actually get it translated, because we think that's the way that's another important aspect of the book. But yes, I mean, I think the book, the whole idea of writing the book, because we monitored the displacement as a result of the Southern Highway for 4 years. And of course we wrote, as we do in a research and organization, a number of reports to the clients, etc. But and had lots of discussions with people. But we also wanted to have a very accessible piece of writing that just ordinary people could read. And I think this book you can read in about an hour and a half at the most. It's very very simply written, but it tells the story of I suppose the contribution that just ordinary people made to make that highway possible. I mean, yes, there was a contribution of money from the donors, there's a government contribution, the engineers did their work, etc. But I think what we forget those are obvious when you go on the highway, no? But what you don't see is who are the people, who are the families that actually contributed.
And on that score, I quote from the book, Shani mentions around 1,338 families were displaced, and about 550 households were indirectly affected. And I did the math, just a napkin math, and at about 4 a family. We are talking about upwards of 5,000 to 6,000 people who were displaced.
Yes.
Which is a large number, and I don't think that statistic is actually in the minds of any motorist who motors down even today. Now, in light of the fact that the highway is also going to be extended to Matara, in light of the fact of development plans to take highways to Kandy, through Kurunegala, and possibly in the next 20 years we'll have a network of highways extending to the east and the north as well, allowing, of course, for greater ease and access of those areas. But Priyanthi, looking at the displacement and that human story of E01, what are the lessons that we can take as we move forward in this road development on this scale?
I think the interesting thing about E01 is that it was the first road development that displaced people in this scale. And the other interesting thing was that when it was at the beginning, there were various changes in the way in which the trace was what is called the trace.
Right.
And as a result of that, there was a certain amount of citizen action, and the citizen action resulted. I mean, there were lots of things that happened. There were court cases, etc., etc. That resulted in a fairly positive response from the Supreme Court, who recognized that people's displacement needs to be taken into account. But also, it resulted in the donor, that's the Asian Development Bank, being asked to monitor the way they did this according to their own safeguard standards. And as a result, much of what happened in the highway with the National Involuntary Resettlement Plan, their own resettlement implementation plan, was also I think very supportive of the people who were displaced.
And so innovative as well, wouldn't you say?
Yes, it was innovative. Well, I suppose it was best practice. It was good practice at any rate, and it went beyond the legal requirements, etc. This is not to say that, in spite of all that, there wasn't a great deal of trauma and a great deal of heartache about about the displacement. But if displacement is to happen, then maybe the E01 displacement was the way it was tackled, despite various learning on the job, as it were, for all the actors concerned, was kind of had some very positive lessons.
Shani doesn't explicitly make the point, but I think it's fairly evident when you read the book, and this is from memory, that those communities which had access to information more got a better deal in terms of relocation, and also in terms of compensation as well.
Yes and no, because there were some provisions. Obviously, people who have access to, so there was a thing called the Land Acquisition and Resettlement Committee, and in those that everybody had to go to before their compensation was determined. And obviously, in that committee, if you were more vocal, if you were more knowledgeable, you probably you probably got a better deal, but not necessarily, because there were the local authorities you could take who could actually vouch for you. So everybody had a chance in that committee. But then there was also a thing called a super lark. So that was called lark. There was a super lark, and to get to the super lark, you probably had to be a little bit more savvy. But then there were also people like the non-title holders, people who had been using land but had no title. Now those people, they were probably not the more affluent. They actually got land for their displaced land. So they got 10 purchase of land on the resettlement sites. So there were people who were among the disadvantaged who also benefited.
Sure, sure.
There was also a definition of vulnerability, and the RDA was quite innovative in the way that they actually used that vulnerability definition. So they had standard definitions, but then they kind of adjusted it when they felt like somebody was very much in need.
I'm going to switch track. It is rumored, I don't know whether you do it anymore, that you are a cyclist and that you are a passionate believer in cycling, and particularly in urban areas. Now, do you cycle anymore?
Yes, I do.
You do, exactly. So this is true then. Now, you've spoken about, for example, the ill effects of diesel in terms of subsidies, and being part of discussions where urban development, the urbanization and traffic, for example, the inability of urban planners to do cycle lanes, for example. And then some of the kickback has been that, in a tropical country like this and with humidity, people are not actually going to take up cycling any more than they already have, even if you open up cycle lanes. But in this perennial contest between environmentally friendly ways when you're planning for development and the kind of development that we've been talking about, the mega scale stuff which goes through forests and displaces people, it's a larger question as to how you balance a country's development and keeping also concerns of global warming and those kinds of things in mind. To my mind, that's not a discussion that's occurring in the media or in Sri Lanka today. You talked about the kind of headline stories. We see the opening of an expressway, but we are not that concerned about the smaller things that can be done, for example, with the existing infrastructure with regards to urban environments where we can make it easier, for example, for pedestrians to just walk around or for cyclists to take their cycle out. New York, for example, I think just last week, and they're going to do it in the next fortnight, is opening up a scheme where you can rent cycles. Now, in New York, they're blue cycles. There are going to be thousands of them sprinkled around the city. It's not an easy cyclable city, but they're going to actually create cycling lanes. So this kind of thing is also happening in the mega cities. Is that a discussion we need to be having here in Sri Lanka?
Well, I think the first thing is I cycle because I like cycling, and when I was a child, that's how I got around Colombo. So I'm sort of
it's different Colombo. Then I would imagine
it was a very different Colombo, and so that's why I do it, and I do it very early in the morning.
It's when not going to how many decades ago that was.
No, we're not going to tell you, and that's why I do it. But I think if you really go around the streets and you really look, you will find that there are people who cycle because that's what they have. Right, so I think there's a difference between my cycling because I like cycling and I'm doing it for somebody doing it for exercise.
So recreational purposes,
there's recreational people than the people who actually have to because that's what they can afford, and that's what you also see when you see a whole family on a motorbike, and you sort of think, my gosh, is that safe? And then you realize, but that's the affordability factor. It's not that you're being irresponsible. There's a certain amount of mobility. So I think for me, the most important thing in a city's mobility is to have like really good public transport. And I think that's really the way we need to go. And I think walkability is also very important. Also in the sense of walkability, access for people with disabilities, all those things are really issues that as we are developing, we really need to take into account. So, I mean, this is a personal perspective. It's not something the Center for Poverty Analysis has done any research on or has worked on. But my thing is that and then the other issue is that all development is a trade-off. You have to decide whether you what you want, what is your end goal, and why do you want to get there. I think there's a quote from Mahatma Gandhi or something which says that it's that the measure of the development of a country depends on how it treats its weakest members.
Sure. Okay.
Yeah, and I think if we use that as as our yardstick, then we might have a very different development to if we think of it in a different way. So I think it's up to. I think.
But you would like that.
I would like that. Yes, of course.
Yeah.
Yes, and coming from an organization that is looking at people who are have less opportunities, are more disadvantaged, I think certainly that is a take that I would certainly take. Yeah.
Is there a correlation? I mean, you've traveled in many countries outside of Sri Lanka as well. Of course, lived in them as well. Do you find any correlation, just on the score that you mentioned, between a citizen's right to access information about, in this case, development, and development being more sensitive and meaningful, for example, on the lines of, if Gandhi did say that, to the weakest segments of society? In other words, does a citizen's right to access information mean better development?
I don't know whether it means better development, but I think citizens just have to have a right to access information about decisions that affect their lives. I mean, the best case scenario is when they can affect those decisions. Yeah, that is, I think, would be true democracy for me. But if at least they need to have information about what affects their lives and why, and some rationale, and in that sense, yes, I mean.
I want to bring this to Colombo as well, because some of our viewers will also be in Colombo. And I want to quote a bit at length from a blog called Dance in a Triangle. This was a blog post put up a couple of days ago. And it's about an issue that is quite close to me as well, because I reported on this last year in terms of what we see, particularly over the past 2 years alone, about the cutting down of trees in Colombo, Bauddha Lokamata, Independence Square, and now Vijayarama. And I quote, "All we can really say at this point is that the trees are gone." This is about Vijayarama. "No matter what we do next, it's too late. But that's the beauty of not having a Right to Information Act. We have no information until the infraction takes place and no way to stop it." And tongue in the cheek, this person goes on to note, and I quote, "It's heartening to note that I have not seen the issue covered in a single newspaper, though the Sunday Times did have information on Tom Cruise's divorce settlement. Thanks, investigative reporters." I think the issue here being flagged is twofold. One is that there is no RTI for the country. The other is that the media seems to be not particularly interested in going behind these kinds of stories. How does CEPA grapple with that? Because I would imagine that the research that you do as an organization, what you are most passionate about as an individual, these are not telegenics. I mean, the telegenics of these stories are not that high on a media radar that simply doesn't encompass and embrace these issues. How do you get the public consciousness to engage with the issues that CEPA and you are most passionate about?
Well, I think the CEPA as an institution does not necessarily have a mandate to be activist. Yeah? We are a research organization. Our commitment is to provide information that is robust, that is researched.
But does it frustrate you that there is no possibly greater?
And that in itself has its own frustrations, because because to get robust information you need to follow a certain process, and that process may sometimes mean that you cannot be as timely with your output as you would like to be. So yes, for CEPA, that is a constant balancing act that we have to deal with, and we tend to deal with that in different ways. I mean, like pushing information to other organizations that have the mandate to be activist, dealing with the stakeholders on in an interactive way right through our research, things like that, and having our own sort of open forums
and your social media.
For myself personally, I actually came out of the hard tea when those trees were being cut. And I just felt, somebody said the other day to me that in a family situation that they had an uncle who screamed at the cat coming into the house and died because I had a heart attack and died. And I think I'm going to die one of these days because I'm going to scream at a tree being cut, because that's really how I felt. I just felt, oh my God, they're violating this street. But then I spoke to the guys who were cutting the trees, and
so these are
they were municipality. They were the same people that cut the trees down Gregory's Road.
Yeah, correct. Yeah.
So they had this person screaming at them before, because I did that when they were doing that, and then they we had a conversation, and they seemed to be acting on some sort of orders, and they seem to be not having any kind of well, obviously they don't have their own say in doing this.
Yeah.
So it's the blog is correct. I mean, there was no consultation. I mean, I don't know, but even when they cut the trees down Gregory's Road, there was very little consultation. On the other hand, while talking about this, I heard some people were telling me that down Albert Crescent, I think, or Albert Crescent, that they were trying to, originally they were trying to take, there's an island with all sorts of trees in it, a traffic island, that they were trying to take those down, and somebody petitioned, and they kept the trees eventually. So I think there's a certain amount of apathy about residents in Colombo, especially Colombo 7 as well, because they, people are worried about it, but there is also the situation about what can we do. So I really don't have the answer to how we can actually overcome that. I
don't know whether you can answer this, but I only ask you because CEPA has been very, possibly the last question as well, but very, very innovative in how you, for example, use photography. I mean, Kannan's work with the estate population to escape or maximize the estate workers' dilemma, it's hard to find, but it's on the web. Black and white photography, not looking at, not capturing the images of the people, but the party of that region. So very, very innovative thinking. Use of photography. You are on Twitter, you're on Facebook, you have a great website. So you're also looking at that kind of media as well. How important is that? Because on the one hand, you said that it's not an activist organization. On the other hand, CEPA's, no, I'm asking as a serious question because this civil society doesn't seem to have done as much as CEPA has done, in a sense, to actually embrace the potential of new media. Is that because you've understood a new demographic you need to address? Is that because you actually want the conversation to occur? Is that because everybody's doing it and you thought you'll try your hand at it? What's your experience of that?
No, I think we have definitely thought very clearly that we don't want to have boring research reports that sit on shelves.
Shelves, yeah, basically.
Yeah, so I think that's where we are coming.
Right.
Right, we don't want to have these tomes. So in the process of looking at, of saying, we need to find another way of getting our information out, we have looked at these various options. What we try to do, I think, on our social media is not so much as be activist, but actually to put out information.
Sure.
Yeah, so the ability to put out information is what we do. But one of the things that I think is a big challenge for us is how do we, now much of that is in the English social media. Yeah? So our big issue at the moment is how do we engage with the non-English speaking public. And we really need to do that a lot more than we do now. And so I think that's really our challenge for the next couple of years, and I think hopefully, I mean, we have in CEPA what we call our 3-language policy. We try to translate everything we do. We try to have at least even in our research publications, at least the executive summary in 3 languages. We are trying to develop capacity in the organization to work in 3 languages. So I think also to get our messages across. We also have something called the Poverty Portal, which is like which is a web-based portal for information, not only our information, but everybody's information on issues of poverty, inequality.
Might be an orphan child though now, but one of the most interesting websites anchored to CEPA is actually PACT.
Yes.
The Peace and Conflict Timeline, a couple of years ago, but very, very useful for researchers of the history of the country.
And that actually was also another aspect of CEPA, which is about trying to put in, when we put out information, to have information triangulated and to look at it from different aspects, because we know that in Sri Lanka or in the world even, that information is spun depending on where you come from. And what we try to do, and part of our quality of our research or quality of our information, is about trying to look at it from different aspects. And I think PACT was a very important, played a very important role during that time.
I mean, it's unique as far as I know in terms of that focus
because it tried to look at it from from an objective, multifaceted,
perspective. Priyanthi, we've unfortunately run out of time.
Okay.
So much more to speak about, particularly about the tree uprooting business, as you know full well, and perhaps it's a conversation that can occur online. Some people argue that uprooting a tree is no big deal because if you plant a tree in another place, perhaps it all balances out. So these are vibrant discussions, but I think you'll agree with me that we need to have these discussions.
Yes, sure.
And that's what's, I suppose, important, and I suppose we'll both lament that we are not seeing as much of the discussions as there should be.
But that's your role, isn't it?
Well, I think that's your role too, much as you try to escape and shy away from activism as CEPA. Thanks very much for joining us on the program, and hopefully continue the discussions online as well. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.